Welcome to What Would Sabrina Say? I'm Sabrina Dong, and I'm excited you're joining me today. In this podcast, I dive into mental health topics on relationships, and overall well-being. With over 20 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker, I share insights and invite expert guests who are passionate about making a positive difference. I started this podcast because I was frustrated with the often misleading or recycled information in social media involving self-help and the mental health field. My goal is to provide you with genuine, useful content that's educational and informative. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you find our conversations both enlightening and empowering. I'm glad you're here. Hi, welcome to the podcast, What Would Sabrina Say? I'm your host, and today we have Noelle McWhirter-Aquino here with us today, a licensed clinical social worker with 30 years experience in Chicago. Thanks so much for joining me today, Noelle.
Thank you for having me, Sabrina. I'm happy to be here.
I was just wondering if you could talk more about your experience, the journey that led you to this book before we dive into talking about anxiety and how this book is so helpful.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So I published a book in 2025, Anxiety Unpacked, Discover Your Type and Recover Your Peace. It came out of my work. I have been a therapist for over 30 years, and it's always been in sort of these very general practice settings where you work with all the things that bring people into therapy. And very early on in my career, I really gravitated towards working with people with anxiety. And I didn't know why at the time, because I personally do not struggle with anxiety. That's not one of my things. I have plenty of other things, but that isn't one of the things that is typically a struggle for me. But I was really drawn to working with clients with anxiety. I found myself early on really feeling a little overwhelmed by, clients presenting with anxiety and knowing really how to help them. And I really felt ill prepared to sufficiently help them. And that sort of led me down this road of pursuing a lot of training on my own and really getting trained in a lot of different models for working with anxiety. And what I found was that all of them had something valuable to say. They all had wisdom about treating anxiety. They all offered helpful tools and interventions. But I didn't really find that there was any one thing that felt like the thing that just really covered all of the many facets and presentations of anxiety. Part of this for me was trying to figure out which approaches should I use for which clients, which, different treatment models and interventions out there will be most helpful for which clients. And then at the same time, I have been working with a lot of clients with anxiety. And I was noticing patterns and themes in the ways that they talked about their experiences with anxiety. So even though the details of their anxiety were always different and their personal backgrounds and histories were different and their current life circumstances were different, there would be repeated themes in the ways that they would talk about their anxiety, sometimes repeating like almost the exact same words. And I got really curious about that. Like, what is this that I'm hearing? And the way that I came to understand that was that they were describing what I call 3 different root causes or 3 different types of anxiety. And the more that I really thought about that and conceptualized that and identified these 3 different types and these 3 root causes, I was able to see that any anxiety a client would present with, I could trace back to originating from one of those 3. They each have different characteristics that make them different from the others. They each have a different need that is driving the anxiety. There's a different root underlying need to the anxiety. And understanding that really helped open up which approaches to use, because I now was thinking about how do I actually address that root rather than just the symptoms of the anxiety, which is so helpful and really brought about like more significant change for clients. I also noticed that each type has its own what I call objection, or way that the anxiety fights to preserve itself when challenged, which it always does. And, once you know what to listen for, you can sort of be on the lookout for it and not get caught up in the trap of that. And then it really helped me to guide my interventions. So this became a framework that for me, this was just really helpful for me as a therapist. I started sharing it with clients. And when I would tell clients, here's how I think about and work with anxiety, I would frequently get comments like, why has nobody ever told me this before? I never thought about it that way before, but that makes so much sense. And they also reported that they felt like they were making greater progress around their anxiety than they had with previous therapy experiences, all of which got me thinking maybe this will be helpful for other therapists, which led to developing therapist trainings in this particular framework, which then eventually led to writing the book. So that is sort of the journey of it. And a lot of the focus was around helping therapists with how to conceptualize anxiety. But the book is written for people with anxiety, which I have a personal interest in because though I don't suffer from anxiety myself, my son, who is now 25, he has lived with pretty significant anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder really for most of his life. It was apparent from a pretty young age that he was struggling with anxiety. So, this interest that I developed early on and not really knowing why, I now look at it as I was training to become his parent and to learn how to support him in his own journey.
I can imagine what it must have been like as a parent, right? Raising a child who's suffering from anxiety and watching those internal struggles.
Yeah.
And he had even interviewed him for this book. And I wonder what it was like to do this, felt like together, like a partnership to share.
Yeah, he's always been very open and, yeah, he's very open with his feelings. He's very open as a person. When I started doing therapist training, so that again, 10 years ago, I started training therapists and I would use examples from my life with him, and some of which are included in the book. And I asked his permission before I would share those stories in the trainings. And the first time I asked him, his response was, "Yeah, you can tell them that. Just be sure you tell them I'm awesome." So, like, that was his only requirement. Just tell them that I'm awesome, and then you can talk about me in any way that you want to. So he's been really open with the book. He read everything I wrote about him, and I let him read it all and get his permission. And he would offered that he would change anything if he wanted, and he made no requests that anything be changed. And then I did approach him partway through writing the book around, could I interview for the end of the book so that people can hear from you and a little bit more about how you would describe what anxiety is like and what the journey of working on your own anxiety has been. And he immediately said yes to that. So I just think that I think it's really generous that, he's been willing to have some of his stories shared. And of course, they're just a few of his stories. There's a lot more that is kept private, but I think it helps other people not feel so alone.
That's what I really enjoyed about this book in your style is that you talked about those root causes, catastrophizing, control, and the disordered beliefs. And as someone who also experiences anxiety, it was so helpful to, lay it out that way and then show the roadmap towards, challenging some of those distorted beliefs, being able to label it, validate some of the resistance from the anxiety that I don't think sometimes people get or how to help tackle, right? Like you even touched on from perfectionism to social anxiety. You mentioned a college student being anxious, right? Going in to class late and what that would be like. And so it was just so nice to see that there's a book that had steps and it wasn't about a specific modality or a specific DSM diagnosis for this or
Right.
label.
Right. Yeah. I was interviewed by somebody who made the comment, you don't mention the DSM diagnostic criteria once in your book. And I hadn't even, thought about that or that wasn't intentional. But yeah, I wanted to make this much more relatable to people's actual lived experiences with anxiety.
And even to touch on intuition versus anxiety, right? Because people trust, anxiety to protect so much and to challenge that as it's not intuition. Intuition's actually calm. It's like, well, how does intuition protect me then if it's not a panic, a worry at the thought about protection, right? It just, and how
Right.
you explained it.
Yeah, I put that chapter in because so many clients think that their anxiety is their intuition. So there's a fear of how do I know when I shouldn't listen to it? Because what if it is my intuition telling me
Yes.
something? Which is a tricky question. I mean, and I can appreciate that's a tricky question because one of the things that's true about, well, and I'm going to back up even further. I also really differentiate the difference between appropriate anxiety, which is, having anxiety as as an appropriate response to real threat and danger, because that's why we have anxiety. Incredibly useful purpose for us. It is what keeps us safe and alive. It's part of how we respond to threat and danger, to keep us as safe as possible and ultimately to keep us alive. So it's a very important thing to feel anxiety. We are all wired to feel it. It's never a problem when it shows up in the presence of true threat and danger. It's only a problem when it shows up in the absence of threat and danger or in a disproportionate way. Uh, and so a lot of people struggle with being able to differentiate between when is this appropriate and when is this not appropriate, or if we're saying that my anxiety is lying to me, or it is, distorting the truth or reality. Like, for people who think that their anxiety is their intuition, there's a real resistance there to, how do I know not to listen and not to trust this? And which I think is a really important question, but there is definitely a difference between your intuition, which is an internal knowing, and intuition is very calm and it's very grounded, and it doesn't ask questions and it doesn't have stories attached to it because it already knows. Whereas anxiety is, experienced as questions and stories and spinning and panic. And those are all feelings you won't have with intuition. Intuition is just this very calm, grounded knowing.
Right. So in some of those situations, how do you balance validating anxiety without having it run the show?
So, one of the things that I always like to have people frame their anxiety through the lens of is, how is it trying to protect me? So, if you start with however the anxiety is showing up and whatever behaviors you have associated with it, they are all serving the purpose of trying to help and protect you. They're probably doing that in a ultimately unhelpful way, but the intention there is to be helpful and protective. So I think that's always a first thing to stop and, wonder about. If you are catastrophizing and imagining all these worst case outcomes, how is that an attempt to keep you safe and help you? And, to recognize that. If you are somebody whose anxiety comes from control and you are constantly trying to control your external environment, anticipate everything that could go wrong, plan for it, over research, over prepare, over function, all the things that people with anxiety rooted in control do, there is a way that you believe that is helping and serving you. So understanding that and first approaching it from that, frame of reference is so much more helpful than just trying to get rid of it, trying to challenge it. There is points where we do have to challenge it along the way, but we first have to try to understand what it's doing for us first before you can move into challenging it.
I really enjoyed in your book having exercises or examples on what someone can do to cope. And the one example you gave is just writing down, um, you know, anxiety negatively impacts you, right? And this distorted thinking, or, oh, it might not, right? So you're kind of discovering and seeing on paper concretely on how it impacts you negatively and things you do or not do because of the distorted beliefs. And just
Yeah,
that
yeah,
exercise to
yeah.
think
So
of like, wow, look at the things it limits me from doing actually.
right. In the section about distorted belief, which, just distorted belief is one of the three root causes, and that's where we hold a negative core belief about ourselves to be true that is in fact false. Things like, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm a failure, I'm a fraud, those kinds of thoughts. And when we have these core negative beliefs, there are always behaviors that we have adopted in an attempt to either conceal those beliefs from other people, like to hide that from other people, or to compensate for it. And those behaviors that we adopt are always anxiety behaviors. And a lot of times we're not even aware that we're doing them. They've become so ingrained, they may feel so necessary that we are not even aware that we're doing them. And so, yeah, that exercise that you're talking about is around, like, first, to help you identify what your distorted belief is, and then to start to reflect on, what are all the things that I do because I believe this is true? What are all the ways that I interact with other people or show up in the world because of that particular belief? Yeah, and I give the example in the book for myself about, like, whenever I have to do anything that draws attention to myself, worry about being awkward. And if I start and think about all the things that I do because of that, I was very quiet in classrooms as a student when I was young. Like, I never wanted to draw attention to myself. If we ever had the times where there were new students in the class and you had to say your name and introduce yourself to the new student, I always had to be asked to say it twice because I would speak so quietly. As I got older, like, I would never raise my hand to ask a question in a classroom in like college or so those are just like a couple, social situations I might avoid or where I might leave early or so things that you could start to identify. These are all things that I do because of this belief. And then like that starts to make you more aware of like how it shows up in your life every single day.
Right. And I really liked how you talked about the book is understanding yourself, origins of yourself, discovering an actual accurate view of yourself, and just
Yeah, which is
learning
very
where the
hard work.
distorted views come from. It is. Yeah.
Yes, and understanding where they came from, because these beliefs are they're always rooted in childhood. There's a quote in the book from a psychiatrist named Rudolf Dreikers, and his quote is, "Children are keen observers and terrible interpreters," which really captures a lot of how we come to these false beliefs in the first place. It's our attempts to
Exactly.
make sense of the world around us, but with such limited capacities. And so there's so much that we absorb and observe about our parents and about how they interact with us and how they interact with each other and ways that we, try to make sense of that through a lens that doesn't have the full emotional and cognitive ability to understand. And we often come to false understandings about, things that we observe and experience.
Right. And also too, you touched on trusting your well-being and competency and feeling good enough. I think that's a hard one, right? To trust.
Yes, trust in many ways is the antithesis of anxiety, so it is a hard one. And that particular concept really comes into play with anxiety that's rooted in control. So, we have catastrophizing control, distorted beliefs, and control is, I spoke to it a little bit ago. It's the super high functioning, capable, successful, competent individuals who describe themselves as highly stressed and exhausted, but rarely identify themselves as anxious. And it's the people who are trying to control their external environments, who think that there's a right way to do things, everything else is the wrong way, have rigid expectations about how things should be done, who over prepare and over research because they don't know when they've done enough in order for everything to be okay. And really, at the root of anxiety rooted in control is this underlying feeling or belief of, I'm not okay or it's not going to be okay. And so these behaviors are ways that we try to create a sense of safety and security when our fundamental baseline is one of not being safe or not being secure. And so the work of that is around really developing trust in self, because the behaviors that we engage in, the trying to control the external environment, all that over preparing and over researching, anticipating everything that could go wrong and creating plans. One of the problems with it is that it makes our well-being dependent on what is happening outside of us. It's essentially saying, I'm only okay as long as what's happening out there is okay. And that's why I try so hard to make everything out there look a particular way. It's so that I can feel like I'm going to be okay. It's why I create plans for what to do if things go wrong, because I believe the only way that I can be okay when something does go wrong is by having a plan ready. And so all of that is externalizing our sense of well-being. And ultimately, what we have to be able to do is turn that sense of well-being to internal, that I possess everything that I need to and adapt and ultimately to be okay, no matter what's happening out there. Because once I trust that and I know that, there really isn't a lot of space for anxiety to take hold. So yeah, trust is a huge antidote to anxiety.
Yes, and I really liked how you've explained in this book about being able to go inward, and it's about internal versus always worrying about external. And even my own anxiety does that, like what other people are doing, what's happening over here.
Yes.
Like it's always out there. Like I'm in my head a lot, but it's always on. what's out here.
What's happening out there? Yeah, said that. That's exactly right. I love that.
Yeah. And so I just really appreciate how you broke it down and, described and explained things in a way that a person who has anxiety experiences it day to day and giving not only laying it out and mapping it out, but also giving the exercises, the strategies about mindfulness as well. What would you say to people recommend? Like, mindfulness isn't always about breathing. What have you seen in your own
Yeah.
experience working with clients with research? Have some of the tools help that you recommended?
Yeah, absolutely. Mindfulness is, I think that mindfulness also gets confused with meditation is a form of mindfulness. So I think a lot of people use those two words interchangeably.
Yes.
And there is a lot of overlap, but I think a lot of people also think that the practice of mindfulness is about trying to achieve a state of an empty mind, which it's not, or trying to not think, which that's never going to happen. We're never going to be able to eliminate thought or achieve this state of an empty mind. I mean, maybe there are some highly enlightened masters who, have been practicing meditation for years and years and years who are able to achieve that state, but that's not going to be most of us. And so what mindfulness really is the practice of observing your thoughts and emotions without judging them and without attaching to them. So it's about developing an observational voice that notice and can notice what I'm thinking, can notice what I'm feeling, can notice what sensations I have in my body, that is able to sort of tune in and bring the attention inward at any time, kind of notice what's showing up for me, be maybe sometimes curious about what's showing up, or just acknowledging what's showing up without judging it as good or bad, and without feeling like I need to like grab hold of this and attached to it just because I'm feeling something or I'm thinking something. So it really is that practice, because what it allows us to do is it allows us to gain a little bit of perspective and a little bit of distance from the things that we think and feel. And it gives us more choice in how we want to engage and if we want to engage. And it also allows us to build in that pause so that we can observe and respond rather than react to things. So it's a practice, and it does take practice, and it takes consistent practice. But when and you can do it by spending time just sitting quietly and just noticing, as you sit there, just notice what you feel, notice what you think, notice where your mind goes. So that is one way that people can practice mindfulness. For some people, sitting is not comfortable at all. So mindfulness can also be done while walking. And I tell the story in the book of a client who would go for daily walks, but she, noticed that when she would go on the walk, she was never really present to what was happening around her. She was very vigilant, and she was always looking for signs of danger. So she would have like this very acute focus on looking for anything that could be a sign of danger, which kept her on high alert. Or she would be kind of ruminating on all the things she had to do that day or on problems. And one day she went for a walk and she just decided, I'm just going to be present to what I experienced on the walk. And she made a point of actually noticing what was happening around her, seeing the kids playing in the playground, seeing people out walking their dogs. When she would pass somebody, she would make eye contact with them and smile at them. And you notice the sun in the sky and the temperature of the air. She said it was like absolutely like a revelation for her to go for a walk in this fashion. And she noticed how calm she felt. She noticed how content she felt. And she's like, this is like, I don't usually feel that way. I don't come back from my walks feeling calm and content. And so that's another way to practice mindfulness. It's just let me be present now and present, to what's happening around me. So there's a lot of different ways. I think like being in nature for people is like, that's a form of mindfulness, because like there's a way in which and I think we're wired this way that when we get in nature, our whole system just calms down, and we tend to become really present to just what we're seeing around us. And that is a form of mindfulness also.
Yes, and what I really liked about, your book, Anxiety Unpacked, is not just talking about the roots of anxiety, but the physiological responses, right? You talked about how the nervous system responds, fight, flight, freeze. You touched on having that awareness to what's happening in your body as well, not just being aware of some of the beliefs or behaviors.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because anxiety, it shows up in your body, it shows up in your thoughts, and it shows up in your behavior. And if we truly want to change our relationship with anxiety, we have to attend to it in all the ways that it shows up. So, this is trying to give people a lot of different options for how to work with all different ways that you experience anxiety in the body, in your thoughts, and in your behavior.
Right. And especially with panic attacks, because they can feel like they're coming out of nowhere. So these
Yeah,
are really great exercises to that awareness to the body, to what's happening in those times as well. Too. Lots of great strategies there, explanations as well, what's happening. And always and being able to name it for people. I think sometimes thoughts are so automatic, our
they are.
physiological response is so automatic,
Absolutely.
and to clearly explain it in such a compassionate way. I also wanted to touch on how you have 2 chapters around self-compassion and just your thoughts
Yes.
around that.
Yeah, the and that comes in under the section of the book that is about distorted beliefs because, that particular type of anxiety also tends to come with a lot of self-judgment. Though the practice of self-compassion applies to any of the 3 types of anxiety that I describe. Um, the way that they talk to themselves is very different than the way they would talk to almost anybody else. We can easily show compassion for people that we love. We can easily show kindness and understanding to people that we love. But when we feel stuck in patterns that feel hard to disengage from, or when we make a mistake, or when we don't know how to do something, our first impulse is often to be very, very self critical and self judgmental. And the practice of self compassion is one of learning how to treat yourself with the same kindness and compassion that you would show to anybody else that you love. There's a line that I borrow from Terry Real, who's an amazing couples therapist. Modify the line, but I want to credit him for sort of the root of it, which is there is nothing that harshness does that loving kindness can't do better. And that's true relationally, but it's also true in terms of like how we speak to ourselves and try to effectuate change within ourselves. And so self-compassion is a way of Kristen Neff, who's a psychologist who's done lots of writing and research about self-compassion. She's identified 3 sort of steps to self-compassion. And the first one is mindful awareness. It's to notice sensations or feelings and how you respond to yourself around them. So it's like to notice that you feel sad or that you feel embarrassed or I feel stuck or I feel frustrated. So, first, to be able to identify that. The second thing is what she calls common humanity, which is to recognize that whatever I'm feeling, other people feel too. This is a normal, almost universal response. Many other people in this situation would feel the way that I feel. Many other people struggle the way that I struggle. It's this way of recognizing like I belong and I'm part of sort of this larger human race. And then the third step is that self-kindness, is how you turn to yourself and talk to yourself the way you would somebody that you love, and to show that kind of understanding and compassion to yourself will get you so much further than any kind of harshness or judgment.
Right. And when I was reading those chapters, I thought about, how prevalent this book is to talk about anxiety because lots of people feel out of control right now with things that feel bigger than us, right? That's
Yeah.
happening globally or
Yeah.
in the world. And just wondering if you can give examples of exercise in your book that might help with when we feel things are bigger than us that we don't have
Yeah.
control of it, right? Whether it's worrying about the environment or financial, cost of living, like those bigger things,
Yeah.
political,
Yeah.
um, and how to manage those types of anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. I would borrow from a few different things, but the first thing that I want to say is that if we are feeling anxiety about things that are happening in the world, and you just mentioned a bunch of things, if it is about things that are actually occurring, this is an example where that feeling of anxiety is sending an important and useful message. It's telling you, I'm distressed by something that is happening. I don't think that what is happening is okay. I'm concerned. So I think the first thing is if you are feeling anxiety about bigger world, cultural, societal events, I think it's important to honor the message that it is sending and what it is telling you either about your values or about, concerns that you have for not just your individual well-being, but maybe more global well-being. So that would be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that from there, we have to get very clear about what is in our control or our sphere of influence and what is not. And when it comes to these big global issues, we have to bring our sphere, like our focus, much more closely inward than outward. Because, if we are expending our energy on things that we simply do not have control over, that is only going to heighten our anxiety. We are going to feel powerless. We're going to feel victimized. We're going to feel, frustrated. So if we are over consuming, and I stress over, if we are over consuming media, if we are constantly scrolling to get more information, which is only fueling our emotions, but is not giving us any outlet for what to do with that, that is not particularly helpful. And if we are expending our energy thinking about, talking about, ranting about things that are happening that we can't influence, again, that's not very helpful. So we really need to bring our focus as closely inward as we can to, okay, if I'm upset about this thing that's happening, what do I have? Where is my sphere of influence in this? And that's where I want to put my energy. If my sphere of influence is, if it's about climate, if my sphere of influence is about composting and recycling and being mindful of consumerism and driving an electric car and whatever else that is, that's a good place to put your energy. If you're concerned about things that are happening politically, if your sphere of influence is that I can contact my representatives or I can vote for representatives that match what I think is important, or maybe there's a community organization I can get involved in where I can actually help people who are directly impacted by whatever the concerns are that I have about what's happening. So I think we have to really drill down to where we have influence and place our energy there. And then I think there is a lot of just that normalizing, and I would say finding community, not that's going to fuel my outrage, but finding community of other people who feel like I do and knowing I'm kind of not alone. And if it's a community that's also taking action in some way, that's even better.
Right. I was just thinking about part of the title book, recovering your peace. This is a way of finding agency, ways that you could still, within your sphere, feel helpful towards what your values or what that anxiety is telling you is important to you, right? So I
Right.
talk about maybe it's, I volunteered and worked at a food bank. I was on board because that was important to me around social determinants of health. And so when we think of we can't make an impact, we can't make that big change. It's like you said, it's looking more macro at what we can do and feel good about.
Yeah, and knowing that actually does make a big difference. When we really look within our more immediate communities and how we can get involved and help there.
Yeah, and experience that exchange of how we're helping and seeing it can be very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciated this book. I was wondering, any projects you're working on, any other books or
I'm
trainings?
definitely not working on any other books yet. Although I'm still wanting to get this one, out in the world and into the hands of as many people who can benefit from it as possible. I will say that if there was going to be another book, it would focus on how these three anxiety types present in relationships and, particularly romantic relationships. And so if there's ever a book two, that will be book two, because the other thing that I do a lot of in my work is couples therapy. So that would be a future thought. Right now, the things that I'm working on, aside from my practice and promoting the book, is training therapists in this framework. And so I've been getting opportunities to do more and more of that, which is also something I really love.
Right. And if people would like to reach you and learn more about either your book or other
Yeah, I was
resources,
gonna, yeah,
where can they
definitely.
find
And I
you?
was gonna say, including like if there are, therapists who are listening who would want trainings, I've gone into practices to do it. I've done that, where people have sponsored me in their communities. So would love any opportunity to do that. I can be reached at Noelle McWard Aquino, and people can find me. Also on Instagram at Noelle McWard Aquino.
Yes, definitely it'll be available. Thanks so much for being on. And if you haven't purchased the book yet, Anxiety Unpacked, Discover Your Type and Recover Your Peace, please get it. It's really, I found it very informative and helpful from being a therapist of 20 plus years and somebody who experiences anxiety. And as I shared with you before we came on, Noelle, it helped me during, a bit of a health scare and walking through and just revisiting tools of being more in the present, focusing on the facts, and helped me just regain that grounding and that peace during that time. So I just appreciate in
Thank
reading
you.
it, you could tell you took the time and effort. I thought, gosh, this is how much work you put into it. And so I thank you for sharing this with the world.
Thank you so much. And thank you for letting me know that it was helpful for you personally. That there's nothing I love hearing more than that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Love to have you on again anytime to discuss yeah, even your future book.
Yeah, would love that. Thank you.